Starting in the 20th century, we started to apply more donations for political campaigns. We're here today to tell you that the influence of wealthy political donors has a negative effect on the democratic process. Starting with the U.S. is becoming a plutocracy. Politicians are biased towards major political donors, and the U.S. has tried and failed to establish regulations to reduce the corrupting influence of money in politics. For my first point about the U.S. is becoming a plutocracy, for those of you unfamiliar with the definition of plutocracy, is a government run by the most wealthy of its population. In the last 40 years, 65% of all money earned in the United States has gone to the richest 1% of the population. This clearly shows how much our class system is diverse, and it's continuing to rise in favor of the money going to 1%. The majority of elected officials are very rich. Not to say that they are in office because they are rich, but it, by happenstance, falls under the pretense that it could be considered plutocracy because of that. Because of their wealth, either through their hard work or the work of their parents, it's very likely that they have socialized with many people in the top tier of the upper class. For my second point, politicians are biased towards major political donors. Sheldon Anderson is a man who contributes a lot to elections. During the last election, his super PAC that he's head of contributed most amount of money out of all super PACs of that presidential election. Recently, he met up with all the Republican, not candidates, but people who plan to run for the primaries. He had them all fly down to Vegas, and they all kind of just had a gathering, which kind of shows, why is this guy inviting all these people down here, and is he possibly making it so that he is influeing how they're going to present their views or how their views will be. Tom Steyer is from the Democratic Party, and he basically came out and said that he was going to donate $100 million to ads to make for the next 2014 election. For my third point, the U.S. tried and failed to establish regulations to reduce the corrupting influence of money in politics. The total campaigns ending per election cycle increased from 77 million in 1974 to 1.8 billion in 2010. This has dramatic consequences. We've tried to limit the amount of money a certain person can spend per election. on, ads and whatnot. But despite these regulations, the amount that these campaigns are spending are increasing, and that is due to mainly super PACs and a recent court case called McCutcheon versus FEC, where it basically disallowed the people to donate large amounts of money to candidates very covertly, and essentially made it so that the most wealthy can influence politics. So hopefully, based on information I've provided, you'll see that the influence of wealth in politics has a negative effect on the democratic process. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, Tyler, let's start off with those things that went pretty well. I thought that you clearly labeled the proposition, that the internal signposting was excellent as you got to each of those individual points. You made a complete argument. It was relatively full, and I thought, even though sometimes it sounds like maybe you get a little stuck or a little hesitant, either because you're having trouble remembering or because of anxiety issues, you got through it and plowed through it perfectly fine. So I thought you did a good job on that. I do think that you did a good job on that first point, defining what a plutocracy was, but I don't think that you discuss it in enough detail to show that we are drifting in that particular direction. So, for instance, you said at one point that most of the elected representatives are rich, but I didn't hear any data on that. I didn't even have an example on any of those sorts of things. And it seems to me like if you're going to make a claim like that, you ought to be able to point to Congress and say there are 435 representatives, 100 senators, and 80% of them were millionaires before they became representatives or senators in the Congress. Something like that would be a lot more convincing. There is also, it seems to me, that if you're going to argue that there's a plutocracy going on, then there's a little bit of a contradiction, because if they've got the money themselves, what the heck do they need to have all these donors for, and how are they going to be influenced by the donors? I think that needs to be developed a little bit more also. There's a presupposition built in here that money buys you both access and influence. It certainly is one of those things where people are going to have it, they're going to have an impact. For instance, the example that you have of Sheldon Anderson, having read a little bit about that meeting that you mentioned in Las Vegas, his purpose was he doesn't want to, he donated a lot in the last campaign to a candidate that didn't make it through the primary. Then he donated a lot to a candidate that he wasn't all that enthusiastic about, but wanted to win, and that didn't happen. And now I guess the idea is in the next election cycle, he's concerned about making sure that the Republicans pick somebody that is electable from his point of view, and that's why he was meeting with all of those folks. So obviously you only get that opportunity to meet with all those people if you're a major donor, and I think that's what you need to build up in here. Is it's the major donors, that's what creates the plutocracy so much. It's that, who are you going to for advice? The same people that you're going to for money, and they, in essence, get your ear. And that, I think there's kind of a presupposition built into your argument that that's the case. I don't think that would be that hard to demonstrate, but it's not really demonstrated in the presentation here. And then you kind of had the same thing for both parties. You had the Tom Steyer description of how much money he's going to be spending. So I think that that's interesting. The third point deals with our inefficiency or inability to control the influence of money. You've got some good data on the growth of money in the process. What I don't see much of is a growth of influence by people who are particularly wealthy. And again, I think that there is probably information that would support that. Data that shows that donors often end up writing legislation that gets sponsored by the representatives, or that representatives kowtow to the rich donors in what legislation they're going to support or something like that. That I think you need a little bit more information on. All right. Thank you much.